I'd like to welcome you to the UAB 2021 Virtual Spring Expo, our second Virtual Spring Expo, and our fourth overall Virtual Expo. So by now we should be experts, but thanks for everyone's patience again. Whenever we're dealing with Zoom or all of these different things, space and grace are it's my philosophy with all of this. So I give everyone space and grace and hope for that in return. But we are so excited to have so many incredible presentations this semester. We have nearly 300 submissions. So we are right back up to where we were before COVID hit, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And that really shows the incredible fortitude and tenacity of our students, as well as our incredible faculty and staff that helped all of this happen. So congratulations to everyone who is at this point. So I want to thank you for that. So let me just quickly share. We have a couple of great announcements that we're going to have here with our presentations today before we get to our keynote. So I'm going to share my screen here and show this real quick. So again, let me go to you see a picture there, just already a preview of what we're going to get to here. Let's resume. There we go. All right. Try again from the beginning. There we go. All right. So welcome once again, those of you who just joined us. So before we get to our wonderful keynote speech, it is my honor to present and to announce the Provost's Award for Teaching Faculty Excellence in Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. And we have our two wonderful participants or people who won this award this year here today. And so we're going to start off first with the amazing repeat winner of this, Erica Rinker. You can see a picture of her here, as well as all the things that she does. But I would like to read to you the submission, one of the submissions that was entered to nominate her for this award. So without further ado, I'll go right into that. Since spring 2014, Erica has sought to make foreign cultures more meaningful by offering it as a service learning course. Initially, Erica's students served as a conversation partners for our Language Partners program. This mutually beneficial partnership created opportunities for international students to speak spontaneously and to receive respectful feedback on their English from Erica's students. In kind, Erica's students were able to engage in cross-cultural dialogues with students from regions represented in required readings. In spring 2015, Erica's students presented the poster awarded first place in the service learning at the UAB Spring Expo, highlighting the resulting knowledge about diversity in our university environment. From 2017 to 2018, Erica students were able to choose to work with the language partner programs or one of two new UAB community partners, Blazer Kitchen and the Wayfinders Hospital Volunteer Program. These partnerships enabled students to acquire a greater appreciation for the food insecurity and disorientation experienced by the refugees in readings like Anna Fadiman's The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down Among Child, Her American Doctors, and The Collision of Two Cultures. In response to the precautions put in place to minimize the impact of COVID-19, Erica has recast her service learning section again in order for students to contribute to community service remotely. This approach is what brought us together. Erica's students are learning firsthand from incarcerated men about their experiences of being culture bound. In exchange for the service they provide, the authors of the Liberated Voices blog of the Jefferson County Memorial Project. In participating in the human acts of writing and corresponding, students are helping to open up the world in which the authors otherwise experience very restricted lives. This link provides a view of the fruitful exchange between current students and Ron McKeechan, recently released from the Donaldson prison. So I would like to congratulate Dr. Rinker on this award. Again, she has won one of these before with Team Environment, but we've been working with her in so many different capacities in our office. She's an amazing collaborator, and we thank you again for all that you have done.
Thank you. May I just share one thing about this award?
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for recognizing especially this work that happened over the last academic year. I am working together with Connie Kohler, who is a professor emerita from UAB, And she and I are able to work now in person very closely with Ron McKeithen, who was released in December after 37 years in Donaldson. And so we met yesterday evening on Connie's porch. So I have the very good fortune, this was not planned, but we sort of found each other through Jefferson County Memorial Project, but we live 3 doors down from each other. And
Wow.
so now our meetings get to just happen on front porches, which is super nice. And we did meet yesterday evening on Connie's front porch together with Ron to talk about how we might use this stipend now to build out this project and support the work that we will continue to do with Ron in our community. So hopefully with Studio 111 and just getting his work out even farther into the community and not letting something like the cost of materials be any kind of barrier he needs to overcome. So thank you for that. Connie and I are so grateful for this funding and to be able to continue our work and grow our work with Ron. And I think it's going to be a great partnership that we continue beyond the pandemic. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really incredible work. And yeah, we look forward to seeing that continue on. All right, on to our next wonderful recipient. A face that is known and beloved across campus. And before I get into the nomination, I just want to give my heartfelt thank yous and congratulations to Dr. Tucker. She has been just an incredible collaborator and just supporter of our office since the day I got here. So thank you again. I just can't thank you enough. So here are some words from her nomination. As director of the UAB Honors College Science and Technology Honors Program, Dr. Tucker has demonstrated a strong commitment to supporting our students and providing exceptional learning experiences. Dr. Tucker designed the Specialized Honors Program to prepare students to participate in faculty research and develop their own scientific research skills. It has had a profound impact in providing opportunities for our honors students to engage in research experiences that are uncommon at the undergraduate level. SciTech Honors provides an important added value in terms of the careful attention to cultivating and mentoring our future scientists, and provides not only a strong foundation for research skills, but also emphasizes innovation and leadership as key characteristics of the successful honor students in our STEM disciplines. Our honor students in SciTech are succeeding at the highest levels, as evidenced by the frequency of national and international awards and fellowships they are awarded. Dr. Tucker herself constantly embodies innovation and entrepreneurship, as evidenced by activities such as co-teaching a SciTech seminar with an entrepreneur in residence from the business school, co-teaching study abroad courses on sustainability for the UAB Honors College, her participation in an NSF-funded team that supports 4 students at the University Innovation Fellows, and her efforts to further embrace teams as a key element of her pedagogical approach. Embracing the UAB Honors College mantra to help our students set your world on fire, the students in our SciTech program are constantly coached to innovate in their academic area of interest. I'm impressed by the energy and dedication Dr. Tucker brings to her teaching and service roles, and her willingness to contribute to conversations about how to best advance UAB and honors education for the future, both in the context of the SciTech Honors Program specifically and in the UAB Honors College as a whole. So I want to again congratulate Dr. Tucker on this award.
Well, I'd like to say thank you, Gareth. You said that I've been a good collaborator for you, and I can say exactly the same thing for you. I have appreciated your willingness to work with us on so many initiatives, and I just really admire what you've done for undergraduate research at UAB. And my plan for the award funds is to contribute them to the endowment that's being developed for the SciTech program that will, have it be feeding back to supporting students in the future. as they take advantage of all UAB has to offer.
Oh,
So thank you.
thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear. Just two incredible uses of these funds, but to hear how these things will live on in the future is fantastic. So thank you. Thank you to both of you. Really appreciate all of your hard work. All right. Well, thanks for both of you for speaking as well. That was a wonderful added bonus. But now we'll go ahead and we'll switch over to our keynote speaker, the equally incredible Dr. Cristin Gavin. You can see her bio here, which is also on our Canvas page for the Expo. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that she can bring up her slides. And also, I just saw something was in the chat. And I just want to make sure I address that. Awesome. Yes. Congratulations. Thank you. All right. And thank you for being with both of us, Dr. Tucker and Dr. Rinker. We really appreciate that. All right. So it looks like Dr. Gavin now has her slides up. You know, as you saw in that bio there, Dr. Gavin is working in so many ways across all of campus and has just taken on this new associate dean position. And again, since the day I've arrived, she's been an incredible collaborator, building research opportunities for her students, but also for all students. And she's in fact now the co-director of the Undergraduate Research Advisory Committee, and will continue to help all students in so many different ways that you don't even know about. So I want to thank her again for working on that, and again for accepting the invitation to be our keynote speaker today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the time now to Dr. Gavin.
Thank you, Gareth, for the warm introduction, and congratulations to Dr. Tucker and Dr. Rinker. And out of all of the countries that I could have mentioned in this talk today, Germany is the only one that made the cut, which I just think is too much coincidence. So it's crazy. All right, so let me get started. So thanks for having me, first and foremost, and congratulations to the winners of the Provost Award. There's certainly a lot to celebrate today, but a big theme of my talk is reflection and kind of what that can teach us moving forward. Because when you think back on, you know, the year 2020 and what happened in science, medicine, research, there's a whole lot of fodder to take there. So I'm not going to talk to you about anything related to neuroscience, actually, which is my area of expertise. But I do think that there are some instructive lessons to be learned from our year of adaptation. So before I ask you to listen to my reflections about probably what was one of the most formative years of your life, I thought I should introduce myself a little more formally, just so we know each other. I'm an assistant professor of neurobiology, and as Gareth mentioned, I have a lot of program qualifications to my name. I focus certainly on education, but primarily work with a group of students that are pursuing medicine and research as their long-term career goals. So I'm a co-director of our undergraduate neuroscience program and of our post-baccalaureate research education program here, and I'm an associate director of our graduate neuroscience theme in the graduate biomedical sciences program. But I work with students across all levels that really choose to pursue science, medicine as long-term career goals. On a personal note, this is just a quick shot of my family, my husband and my two girls. This has been, you know, another challenge of the year. But Greg is my husband, and Reese and Parker are my two little girls. Reese is 3 and Parker is 9 months next week. So it's been a year. So this is a quick outline of what we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to go through and read the bullet points to you because I would rather spend the time elsewhere. But I pulled this image off of the UAB Reporter a couple weeks ago because I really needed to spend some time reading all of the responses from our community about how they summarize 2020. And I think that while there are definitely some positive monikers there, we can all agree that 2020 was a bad year. And I wanted to take a moment before I plunge into the content of my talk to really recognize the collective trauma that we've gone through. Many of us lost friends and family. We're sick ourselves. We handled disruption to our livelihoods and education, our sense of societal normalcy. We had to go through life events without friends and family, you know, knowing from personal experience, I had a child without the support of our extended family. We adapted to a new way of digital hyperconnection in our lives that was often devoid of human connection. But we endured. We're coming out the other side of this. And in the moment, it really feels that hope is expanding to replace some of that, or occupy some of the space that grief has really occupied. So if you lost loved ones, my heart goes out to you. If you were robbed of experience and happiness that was due to you, I also apologize and empathize. But I just wanted to recognize that we needed to have that little bit of grief. I also want to say thank you to the healthcare workers on the front lines. And while they're not the focus of this talk today, I know we always have an excellent presence of nursing students, health profession students at this event. And it would be remiss for me to not acknowledge their outstanding efforts and the sacrifices that they and their extended professional networks have made to care for the sick this year. So I just want to thank you for that. But my primary goal of coming to you today is to reflect on the past with some renewed optimism for the future. And let's share some guiding principles that I hope you will take with you after our time here today. And making the most of 2020 was not a small feat. So I commend you for coming to the expo, presenting your work, and showcasing your efforts despite those obstacles. So as a scientist, my scientific community works alongside physicians in a quest to treat disease. I also work with an overwhelming majority of students that want to become physicians and researchers and continue this mission themselves. So the institution of medicine is never far from my thoughts. And in March of 2020, as campuses closed and hospitals braced for this surge of patients as a result of the pandemic, the medical institution was thrust into a national spotlight in a new way and tasked with a seemingly impossible job. They were told that they needed to treat patients, contain the virus, understand this unique biology, develop treatments, and all in a timeline that avoided economic catastrophe and reverted to normalcy as quickly as possible. So really no small request on medicine for this year. And medicine was up to that task. In addition to saving lives, academic medicine and public health experts mounted a response to the pandemic that allowed for the development of novel therapeutics, dissemination of information to the public, and establishing public health infrastructure at a pace that we have never successfully observed. In the science realm, we had over 1,000 papers and preprints related to COVID-19, and that's a conservative estimate during the 2020 calendar year. And this was while most non-COVID related research ground to a halt or at least sputtered. So early reports of research focused on case studies and epidemiological modeling and promising treatment options, while the second part of the year saw a surge in topics related to mental health, vaccine development, and health disparities. So in short, 2020 was a monumental year for science and academic medicine. To take this back to a personal level, I would assume that everyone has a shutdown story, kind of where we were and what we were doing when the seriousness of the situation began to materialize. I personally vividly remember my final hours on campus that Friday, sitting with Mike Sloan and Rebecca Freeman in the Spencer's Honors House after we had finished advising. And I was kind of furiously refreshing the most rudimentary COVID-19 dashboard that existed at that time, watching our state numbers and kind of thinking about the consequences. I also remember downloading Zoom and being completely flustered at how to work it and requesting training for the very next day. And at that point, I had no idea how many times I would, click on that little blue icon and how it would come to represent my professional life as well as my personal connection to people. So that night when I came home, my husband and children safe with me, I finally got a little bit of space to think about how I wanted to approach the next day. So I picked up this book. I turned to history because often history informs our present, and I have a lot of respect for the historic discipline. So I picked up this book, The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. And if you've not read it, it's excellent. It came out in 2004. He probably had no idea how prescient his book would become, but it rapidly shot back up the bestseller list at the start of the pandemic. And I want to share a story from that history to give meaning to the work that you student researchers are doing and context as to how important research is in this bigger picture of humanity. So bear with me because I'm not a historian, a virologist, a public health expert, or really, I'm a neuroscientist, but I felt like the information shared here gives some really great background about the origins of the modern academic medical institution in the US, and provides context about how research and medicine have co-evolved since the last major pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic is both similar to and different from the 1918 influenza pandemic. Both spread widely, killed indiscriminately. Both were complicated by global messaging and complex geopolitical issues. They both impacted economies greatly, impacting people's livelihood as a result of that. An important epidemiological difference includes the infection timelines, with the 1918 flu killing in a matter of hours as compared to a long, often asymptomatic incubation period seen with COVID-19 infections, not to mention the persisting nature of COVID-19 infections. It's also notable that the 1918 flu killed a disproportionate number of young people in the prime of their life, which destabilized our workforce and the war effort in World War I. This also left many orphaned children in its wake, and that is one difference for which I think we can all be grateful. So perhaps most importantly, both pandemics, and arguably any pandemic, pit science and medicine against a pathogen. And while this is a tragic part of our history, it is startlingly absent from our collective societal memory. Often a box in a textbook or a passing reference at a family gathering, but not much more than that. I felt as a whole we were poorly prepared for the nature of a pandemic and the effect that it would have on us professionally, personally, and at the level of our medical teams. So the roots of modern academic medical centers such as UAB are embedded in this history, and showed me and can show us how learning from the 1918 pandemic positioned us to effectively combat the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. So at the turn of the century, medical education was strictly a for-profit enterprise that was producing a surplus of very poorly trained physicians. Medicine was peddled to consumers, so bought and sold with processes like bleeding to balance the humors, and the selling of tinctures and reading of skull bumps to tell you what your personality was like. So these non-evidence-based practices were really the peddle of the day. To be trained as a physician, the only admissions requirement was an ability to pay the cost. Instruction was limited to lectures with no focus on clinical skills. And any student that was serious about becoming a physician to improve healthcare for people would often seek out a different sort of education by going to Europe or by moonlighting in hospitals to get any patient care that they could. I felt like this image taken from the Philadelphia Museum of Art's collection called The Gross Clinic by Thomas Eakins really captured where the state of medicine was at that time. You see rows upon rows of physicians in this darkened theater observing a surgical procedure with no sterile technique, taking notes about how to be a hands-on practitioner. So enter Abraham Flexner. So Abraham was a former school teacher from Kentucky and was an expert on educational practices, though he was not a physician himself. He was recruited by a philanthropic group called the Carnegie Foundation, and his job was to assess medical education in North America with the aim of improving healthcare. After rigorously combing through academic records at close to 160 medical schools in the US and Canada, he issued a report in 1910 that was instrumental in changing the structure of medical education as we know it. The report was somewhat damning and led to the closing of nearly half of all of the medical schools in North America, but it reimagined what medical education would become. So Flexner believed that medicine was a scientific discipline that could be best realized by using the German model as a prototype in American schools. So the German system was one in which physician scientists were trained in laboratory investigation first as a foundation for clinical training and investigation in university hospitals. So science was the theme, it was the model, and physicians were tasked with this responsibility of generating new information and creating progress in medical science as a discipline in and of itself. There were schools in the US that were kind of leading this organic shift towards medical education reform. Michigan, University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard were kind of the three notable ones. And they did this in parallel with the Flexner Report by extending their courses of study, adding more science to the curriculum, both as an academic topic and as field work, so getting this hands-on research experience. And they also hired full-time medical scientists to the faculty. And instead of learning by didactic instruction, students were now expected to learn by doing, and were, tasked with this goal of contributing new knowledge through the course of their careers. So the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine was established in 1893, and it became the model of this scientific medical education paradigm. It was the first medical school that required a college degree for admission. They had a 4-year curriculum instead of a two-year curriculum. Classes were small, students were expected to be frequently examined, and laboratory and clinical clerkships were kind of the cornerstone of teaching devices. And the full-time faculty made medical research as well as education part of its mission. So in short, this reform produced what we now think of as medical education today. The first physician that was recruited to the Johns Hopkins Medical School was Dr. William Welch. He also would serve as the first dean of the school. He was a lifelong practitioner of this philosophy, so both medicine and research, and practiced the principles that the institution was built upon. Among his many other accomplishments, as you can see, he discovered the pathogen that causes gas gangrene and served in pretty much every leadership role of any medical institution that exists to this day, as well as the founding editor of many accomplished journals. Among his many other accomplishments, he established the Johns Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health, which was the first of its kind in the US. Its doors opened for the first time on October 1st, 1918, in the midst of what would become the surge of the 1918 flu pandemic. So about 6 months later, after that opening, William Welch was also the first physician to suggest that the outbreak of the 1918 influenza was the result of a novel pathogen. And this followed observations that he had made during an autopsy from a flu victim in a military camp where he was also serving. It would not be until 1930, early 1930s, that the full conclusion about what caused the 1918 flu pandemic would be revealed. So some back history to the history I'm telling you about now. In 1892, a German bacteriologist named Richard Pfeiffer discovered what he thought was the causative agent of influenza. He believed it to be a small rod-shaped bacterium, and he found it and isolated it in the nose of patients suffering from the flu. It's now known as Haemophilus influenza, shown here, and formerly known as Pfeiffer's bacillus. So when this violent strain of flu emerged in 1918, most physicians believed that Pfeiffer's bacillus caused influenza. So they were swabbing noses of patients, searching for this elusive bacterium, but to no avail. So at that point, after 6 months of fruitless searching, Dr. Welch became concerned that they were dealing with something never before observed. And while we knew that viruses kind of had become part of the lexicon, but there was no way to image them because there was not microscopy strong enough. So it was believed that there was just this novel pathogen that no one was able to isolate and or visualize. So a young physician from Iowa named Richard Shope was the first scientist to identify viruses as the causative agent of the flu. Although it was not in humans, it was in pigs, and it was almost a decade after the close of the 1918 pandemic. His discovery cast enough doubt on bacteria as the source of the flu and set the stage for other researchers to identify and isolate a virus as the cause of human influenza. But this was not accomplished until 1933, a full 13 years after the close of the 1918 flu pandemic. So what is your point, right? Why am I telling you all this? Because what was not in place in 1918 resulted in widespread death and suffering. But those who experienced it and were leaders during that period learned from it and made important changes that have allowed humankind to succeed in the face of future epidemics and pandemics. Academic medicine is just one example of that, but I'm certain that there are others in almost every discipline that has been impacted by a situation such as this. So the 1918 pandemic forged a permanent bond between science and medicine, but that relationship was not at a place to be effective at that critical juncture in history. Our academic medical system that was put in place in the outset of the 1918 pandemic set modern scientists up for success. Decades of collaborative research between medical and research communities prior to the outbreak in 2020 uniquely prepared us to swiftly and effectively address a novel pathogen. While physicians in 1918 understood the idea of germ theory and spread of disease through respiratory droplets, viruses were not a confirmed pathogen until microscopes became powerful enough to visualize them. They literally had no idea what was causing the disease. However, they did know that isolating the sick and creating barriers to transmission worked. Thus, they pretty much coined the use of non-pharmaceutical interventions, things like masks, social distancing, other hygiene practices like washing hands, coughing into your elbow, staying home when you're sick. It does work. And at that point, public health became its own discipline. General health, living and working conditions across the country improved as a result from that point forward. So Barry, in his book, writes, "Those in authority must retain the public's trust. The way to do that is to distort nothing, to put the best face on nothing, to try to manipulate no one," end quote. And this is how science should be also. You should follow the truth, even if the conclusion is not what you expect, even if the answer is disappointing for you or your collaborators to hear. To subscribe to such ruthless truth finding is a cultivated skill, and I encourage you to practice it frequently. So, as the future leaders of science, medicine, public health, government, policy, education, all of the disciplines that are regularly represented at our expo, what can we take away from this shared experience, our history and current experience, that will prepare us for success in the face of future challenges? What has a year of research yielded? And what needs work as we move forward? So first, let's start with the good news, things that I think went well. So vaccine development easily tops this list for me. Typical vaccines take on the order of 5 to 10 years to develop and bring to the public, not 5 to 10 months. While the technology for mRNA vaccines, such as those developed by Pfizer and Moderna, have been in the works for some time, they were not market ready when COVID-19 arrived on our doorsteps. But the pandemic provided unique conditions in which we could test the technology of these vaccines at a pace that we would not be able to otherwise. Industry, government, academic medicine joined forces. These public-private partnerships rapidly developed, tested, and distributed a widely effective vaccine and a nearly superhuman timeline. Clinical trial volunteers also deserve a nod of appreciation for their willingness to volunteer themselves to science. So again, in my book, this is a resounding win on the fronts of medicine, research, and humanity. As of the first week of April, over 80% of UAB employees had been vaccinated, and our state numbers are also moving in the right direction, with about 30% of Alabamians having received one dose and 17% receiving both doses, with appointments continuing to book across the state. And so now that all of campus is vaccine eligible, I'll do a shameless plug that you can sign up to get yours on the UAB United site if you have not yet done that. So medical innovation like that we saw during vaccine development would not have been possible without the support of the research enterprise. While much ongoing research ground to a halt in late spring, that temporary shutdown allowed major academic research centers like UAB to pivot and devote their research efforts solely to understanding COVID. And while I'm emphasizing this on the biomedical front, this was equally true for efforts in public health, behavioral sciences, education, and more. Everybody went to work in their respective disciplines. For example, at UAB, labs with relevant technical applications immediately shifted their focus of inquiry to understanding the novel virus and exploring therapeutics to support our hospitals. We quickly saw calls for applications for internal funding that were reviewed and granted on impossibly short timeframes. We saw requests for innovation and testing technologies. Similar calls went out to experts and professionals in schools across campus, ranging from public health to health professions. It was an all hands on deck moment, and in some ways magical to experience this near instantaneous pooling of resources that were directed at this common formidable goal. I was very proud to be a Blazer. Our campus also adapted to keep ongoing research productive. Labs went to virtual compatible activities such as data analysis, publishing, grant submissions, and it was not a lost effort in no means. UAB secured $325 million in grant funding from the NIH in 2020, despite those challenges. And much of what was done during those months was done with the help of student researchers such as yourselves. Scientific leadership also had a moment in 2020. Scientific leaders drive the integration of science into the wider world and culture, which allows science to have a more influential position to change the world for the better. UAB advised key leaders across Alabama on best practices and next steps throughout all of 2020. We provided guidance to the governor's office, Jefferson County and Alabama Departments of Public Health, and state and regional hospitals. Our strategies that we practiced on our campuses, from testing to tracing and reopening our classrooms, provided a framework for others to do the same. It's also not uncommon to see our own faculty members, such as Dr. Michael Sag or Ginny Marazzo, on your television at any hour of the day or night, giving evidence-based advice to those beyond our state lines. So UAB has and continues to be a leader on a national scale throughout this crisis. This should also make you very proud. So I started with the high stuff, but no scientific presentation would be complete without a critical eye, turning the lens on ourselves critically, because this is where we have the most room for growth and progress. So when a pandemic strikes, there are two routes by which to combat the ravages of disease: vaccines or therapies. And while we were very lucky on the vaccine front due to this highly concerted mass effort, our toolkit for therapies to treat the sick was not quite as successful. Remdesivir is an antiviral that is given by intravenous infusion in the hospital and is currently the only drug that is approved by the FDA to treat COVID-19. There's good evidence that patients that receive the drug recover faster, and there are ongoing studies to investigate potential use of engineered monoclonal antibodies. Only 2 have been given emergency use authorization by the FDA for use on COVID-19 patients. So there's definitely more testing needed on this front. We also need additional research to develop novel therapies, but also to investigate potential uses of existing therapies. Dexamethasone, a commonly used steroid, has had some success in the clinic, but ultimately we have many different therapies that we have not been able to test adequately. So a national crisis such as a pandemic often magnifies disparities and inequities in our society. It literally tests the seams of the fabric. In 2020, we saw Black, Hispanic, American Indian, and Alaska Native people in the US continue to suffer an outsized share of sickness and death as opposed to their white counterparts. Dean Vickers wrote a wonderful op-ed published in UAB Today in April that directly addressed some of these concerns, and I want to read to you from his piece. He said, "These alarming outcomes are in large part the result of longstanding inequities in an array of health determinants, including limited access to health care, especially primary care, and limited access to affordable housing and fresh foods. These have led to higher rates of COVID or chronic illnesses like blood pressure, high blood pressure, diabetes, and renal failure that increase the risk of severe illness from COVID-19 among minority populations," end quote. These inequities also extend to rural communities, and they extend into vaccination efforts as well. So it's not just about treatment, it's also about protection. UAB continues to make a concerted effort to send mobile vaccination teams into underserved areas to reach as many people as possible. Dean Vickers also went on to challenge all of us to make a renewed commitment to provide healthcare coverage to underserved populations and improve access to housing and nutrition, among other things. He recommends specific strategies that will challenge the norm and require outreach and relationship building from our future leaders. He recommends using existing infrastructure and partnering with community leaders as a way to make inroads in these groups. And while I highlight that these inequities are occurring at a local, regional, and national level, it is also important to note that inequity was observed on a global scale as well, particularly as it concerns vaccine access. Wealthy countries secured large quantities of vaccines, while less wealthy countries were not able to do so. And recovery from a worldwide pandemic requires international partnerships that address access for all people, not just those in the wealthiest countries. There are also challenges in developing countries that we will continue to navigate, such as supply chains, refrigeration, and cultural differences. All of these require our attention. Scientists also quickly began dissecting this issue as the disparities in healthcare became obvious. And they came away with several recommendations. The first was the obvious need for more physicians and scientists of color. While rooted in truth, rigor, and transparency, the institution of science is not free of bias. We know that Black scientists are underrepresented in faculty positions, and despite innovating more than their white colleagues, they receive less funding and less media attention. In the future, we should aim to do better in recruiting, supporting, and promoting scientists from minoritized populations. As schools and daycares closed across the country, the burden of child care largely fell to women across all careers. In science careers specifically, men are already 4 times more likely than their female peers to have a partner that is solely dedicated to domestic care. This creates a culture that disadvantages female faculty, and it also disproportionately impacts faculty members of color. So with more time being spent on caregiving responsibilities during the pandemic, female scientist productivity dropped at an alarming rate. Some estimates place this reduced productivity at between 20 and 40% of effort. And this was particularly true for those caring for children under 5 years old. This was reflected by self-report as well as by the presence of female authors on preprints, publications, and applications for grant funding. In contrast, those same metrics for male authors increased proportionately. And this will resoundingly impact women across the scope of their careers. While this is not new news for science by any means, the conditions of the pandemic do threaten to undo 30 years of hard-won positive progress in bringing diversity of gender and race to science. So I hope that your generation of researchers will continue to change the culture of science by adopting better practices to support people of all genders and races. So in conclusion, to quote one of my all-time favorites, Winston Churchill, another nod to my history roots, if you're going through hell, keep going. We will come out the other side of this with a new understanding of how to improve society and advance humanity. And we can clearly see that the end point is within our grasp. As the world's future researchers, physicians, policymakers, heads of industry and business, learn from the societal test that was the last year of our lives and make improvements where we were lacking. Your voice is important now and in the future. So do not shy away from getting involved and making strong recommendations. Incorporate discussions of inclusion and equity across all disciplines and implement that diversity of race, gender, identity, wealth, experience, and age wherever you can. The more representation we have, the more we are able to serve all of those within our society. And while I'm happy to take questions about anything that I talked about, again, I'm not a virologist, public health expert, or a historian. I would also encourage you to take this forum to share your experiences about what went well for you or what you think needs work, because indeed, we are all in this together. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much. I started the applause wagon. I know that will go through. It's always a little awkward once you end one of these because, yeah, we can't all just yell and clap, but that was fantastic.
I encourage everyone to unmute and yell if the mood strikes.
There they go. See the clap, peer pressure work there. But yeah, we definitely have some time here for the form to, you can type it in the chat or you can raise your hand. I'm happy to, you can speak directly to Dr. Gavin if you have any questions or comments, or just share an experience from this past year. I think, everyone had something. So feel free to drop that in the chat. I do see one hand up. Let's see.
Hey, Maria, good to see you.
All right.
Hey there.
Yes, go ahead, Maria.
Basically, my question is for the very end of your presentation. You stated all the areas you're not an expert in, but one of the areas you are an expert in is being a member of a university community. Mm-hmm. And would you agree that one of the most important things that universities can do to help the discrepancies is to allow for the PhD to be pursued on a part-time basis? Currently, you have to do all your student work, and then people who don't get funded have to TA on top of that. So for all of these things that happen with women, us being the caretakers and et cetera, isn't the, having some of these degrees, having them full-time only, that's exacerbating the situation, is it not?
That's really great feedback. And I hope that someone in our campus community is surveying those PhD students. It would not surprise me if this data collection is ongoing about how their course of study was impacted during the pandemic. But you raise an excellent point. I think as we all transition from a virtual and remote environment back to our on-campus presence, vestiges of this flexibility will remain, hopefully, to give that to people so that education can be pursued despite practical obstacles, right? Like that should be the mission of higher ed. So I think when you're looking from a philosophical standpoint, should we have that flexibility? Absolutely. But it's, I think, going to largely vary discipline to discipline as to what sort of apprenticeship model you're using for your training. Like, for example, in the biomedical sciences, it's very hard to conduct research remotely because you have to be in person with the reagents, with the animals, with the culture, whatever it is that you're working on. There's no way to adapt that to a virtual environment. But the areas where we can adapt, we probably should. It does not seem like we are going to get less virtual. We need to learn to use these tools in a positive way moving forward. So I would suggest sharing that information back up. If that was a challenge for people in your program, yourself, that is valuable feedback for the graduate school to hear.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments or things to share? I might pick on a couple people I know in here if no one does, if that's okay. Now everyone drops out. Well, since I don't see a hand, and if you don't feel like speaking, I totally understand. But I see Rose Albert is here, and Rose has received a couple of fellowships and scholarships in this challenging year, and I was just wondering if. I think we lost her as soon as I said, oh no, she's here. Good, I see her now. All right. But I was just wondering, Rose, if I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I just want to commend you for still applying to all of these things and working through all the challenges. And I just thought maybe you could share what that experience was like for some of these other students about applying for these scholarships and fellowships during this COVID year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think my main takeaway from this year is just leaning on your support systems. I don't think I visualized that I would be here at a lot of regards in terms of the pandemic, in terms of research, without the people around me. And I think it took a lot of really understanding research mentors to help me pivot my research and pivot my career goals. I feel like a lot of times I explain my research as being a mixed bag because sometimes at first glance, the things that I've done in the past may not seem to be aligning with what I want to do in the future, but it really took those research supports to help me reframe the skills that I have gained in the past and how I can apply those to the future. So I think the main thing is how we discussed this past year and thinking about it, not as a lost year, but a year of resilience and that reframing.
Excellent. And just if you don't mind sharing with folks that you were Goldwater and this new fellowship. Tell people a little bit about those that you've received.
Yes, so honestly, the Goldwater Scholarship was not something I initially imagined myself applying to, but I became familiar with the fellowships office after I won the Udall Scholarship last year. So to give some context of why I consider myself a mixed bag, I am a chemistry major, but I'm also pursuing a master's in public health with a concentration in environmental health sciences. And my long-term goal is to work with environmental justice communities, doing basic science research, so exposure assessment, but also pairing that with community-based participatory research initiatives, because I think that universities should be directly serving the communities they're in. And I had a lot of trouble articulating how to match these goals with my undergraduate research experiences. And even now, as I'm considering PhD programs, deciding between something in public health, more of the air pollution and exposure assessment, versus something more in basic science of actually looking at those pollutant interactions. But ultimately, refining those goals through writing these personal statements have helped me realize that I have this very large, big picture idea of what I want to do, and there are multiple pathways that I can take through pursuing that.
Excellent. And I just have to promote the expo, because I know you presented a few times at the expo before applying for these, because I always tell students that the expo is your opportunity to practice. And it's the stepping stone to these other types of opportunities. So thank you, Rose, for throwing you on the spot and talking about that. But I just wanted to have you as a wonderful example. I'm going to pick on one other student right now that I see up here that has also had the opportunity to still submit and participate. And that's Ryleigh Fleming. Ryleigh, are you able to turn on your camera and chat with us? If you aren't, that's okay. I see your name, but maybe you've had to step away. That happens sometimes. I'll just double check. Well, Ryleigh, I'll talk about her here real quick.
Sorry, my apologies.
That's okay. No problem, Ryleigh. I'm picking
sorry.
on you just because I saw you there, and I just had Rose talk about her experiences and some of the things that she accomplished this year. And I thought, Ryleigh, if you don't mind sharing a couple of the things that you accomplished this year as well during this challenging time.
Hi. So I was recently selected to do Posters on the Hill, and that was a very amazing thing. I was very blown away myself because, well, if it wasn't for Professor Rout having put me onto the opportunity per se, I would have never known. And just like Rose has mentioned, it's been very difficult per se with COVID-19, trying to pivot your research. And I give so many kudos to Professor Rout with her creating that module about raising awareness about COVID-19 and having her students learn through actually trying to make change in their community. It's been amazing. And so, yes, it's just been a whirlwind. I'm still very surprised that I, got it. And I'm very excited to get to speak at Posters on the Hill. And yes, our
experience is going to be.
Oh,
I'm so excited for you. It's going to be such an experience.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, that Posters on the Hill is one of the most prestigious opportunities to present in our country. There are only about 60 students selected across the country. And so Ryleigh gets to actually talk to and present to our representatives. And that's so huge for UAB. This is the third year in a row that we've been fortunate enough to get a student in this. And so, yeah, and it was really that pivot that you did with Dr. Rout. I can't commend you enough. And you also got the experience of, gaining some awards from the CGIU, the Clinton Global Initiative University. Same thing where you pivoted your research. And so I just think both what you did and what Rose did are fantastic examples of positive examples of how you can make an adjustment. That's what science is all about, right? That's what research is all about. Things change. They aren't always the way you think they're going to go. And that if you can pivot and you have the support and those opportunities, you can absolutely still succeed. And I'm just so excited that both of you joined us today. Any other questions or thoughts or comments for Dr. Gavin before we wrap things up and let people head out for their lunch?
It was a pleasure speaking to all of you today. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and listen to me.
Well, and thank you for speaking. This was fantastic. And if any of you joined late, again, we've been recording. We will post a link to this in the Canvas page, but it will also go to the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research YouTube page. So you can go back and check it out in its entirety. Or if you're doing a report on the history of influenza, you can get some good sources there. And also, again, be proud of all the things that you have accomplished this year. I'm so glad that Dr. Gavin focused on that, because it has been challenging, but there have been amazing things that have happened at the same time, partially because of what we've had to endure. So congratulations to all of you who are participating in the expo, and as you're preparing for graduation or wrapping up this semester, kudos to all of you. So with that, I'll go ahead and close out the expo keynote speech, and thank you again to Dr. Gavin. We cannot thank you enough for that wonderful presentation.
Have a good one.
All right, everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.